So what's on the table? What's off the table? Let's find out. Joining me now is the Minister of Heritage, Steven Guilbeault. Minister, thanks so much for being here.
Pleasure
All right,
being
you
here,
told me on CTV's question period that media companies will be licensed. Many people assumed you were referring to news organization. Who exactly, exactly will require a government license? Please clarify.
Let me be crystal clear. News agencies will not require licensing or registration by the government or any other agencies. It's not on the table, not at all.
Okay, who decides what a news organization is? Because that's the crux of it.
No, not at all. And again, the government is not in the business of deciding that. So we will not be asking news agencies for license or registration. We're not doing that. This is about something else in the report that has to do with discoverability, but it's not about news.
But in the recommendations in the report, they redefine things as media content. They define what they call alphanumeric, that's websites. They say they all need registration and they all need licensing, so it's a very broad scope, sir.
No, they in the report, and again, we have to take a step back. We're talking about an independent panel report that was presented last week that makes a series of 97 recommendations, but they specifically exclude in the report licensing from news agencies.
But they define media content as it's a very broad definition, and that's why people are asking you. So let me just be clear. You say no license.
The confusion comes from the use of the term media in the report.
So what is it? What's your definition of
media? The important answer is not what my definition is, but in the report, they refer to media as anyone who produces content.
Right.
And they say that for news agencies, there will be no licensing required.
But what about for aggregators? What about for opinion sites? Your point of view is relevant because you're the guy that has to decide what parts of the recommendations you're going to use. So are aggregators, which are recommended, are other sites, are content opinion sites, are those going to be licensed?
What we're interested in is how can we continue to have good Canadian cultural content made in Canada and made available. Okay, but that's what we want to.
But the scope
the legislation is going to be on that. It will not be about organization producing news. We're not going there. We're simply not going there.
But
I can't tell you what the bill will look like because I don't know. But what I can tell you is that news agencies, no licensing, no registration.
So you said no to license, and now you're saying no to registration as well. Just so people know, there's a license element, but it recommends that media content companies, all of them, websites, broadcast, anyone that produces media content that's in the report has to register, and they're subject to levies. Are you saying there's no registration then?
That's a recommendation by this panel. In terms of what the bill will contain, what we will ask the Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney's of this world to contribute to in terms of Canadian cultural content and what tools will we use, I can't answer that because I simply...
So when you talked to me on Sunday on CTV's question period and you said, yeah, we're going to license, media companies and organizations will be licensed, that's no big deal. What were you actually meaning?
What I'm saying is that the regulations that we will have will apply to companies that are operating in Canada, just like our laws and regulations apply to any companies.
I've got to get clarification here. What will apply? Will any company, there's a lot of people listening who produce independent media, will they be subject to a registration and license? What is the scope of your desire?
You're asking me to go into specifics, and I really can't now because the bill doesn't exist.
Did you overstep on question period when you said, yes, I'm okay there'll be a proportional licensing and registration, which means that everyone's going to get something? Was that an overstep?
Again, what we're talking about is how do we ensure that we continue to have good Canadian cultural content, and how do we ask companies that are making money in this sector in Canada to contribute, because right now we have a system where some Canadian companies are under some form of regulations. They have to contribute to different funds, and we have web giants that have no regulations that apply to them right now.
You have a lot of media companies. I started my career starting my own magazine with a buddy. Would that be subject to a registration?
News will not.
But it's not news. It was commentary. I wasn't breaking news. We were reporting on things, aggregating. Do I have to now register?
Again, no, you don't have to register, because we will not be asking news agency to register.
But the Prime Minister said, sir, in question period today, you need to be a trusted news source. That's what he said, trusted media source. And then it also said trustworthy. Who defines what's trustworthy and who defines what's trusted media?
Again, we're talking about the report of an independent panel that is making a series of recommendations.
Right.
We are looking and analyzing and really digesting these recommendations to see how can we put together a new regulatory framework in Canada to ensure that we continue to have good Canadian productions with Canadian cultural content, and that these be made available. That's our goal.
I understand that, but after our last interview, people are concerned on what the Prime Minister said today. Will the government be deciding who's a trusted media source? Why are you using that expression?
No, and the Prime Minister was very clear. I'm standing right behind him in the House, and I must have said it 4 times on the show today, if not 5. We will not be asking for licensing or registration.
Okay, but what then is a trusted media source?
What does
that term mean?
This comes from the report. So you'd have to ask the people who did the report
but the Prime Minister is repeating
what they had in mind.
Okay.
Let me reassure people, we're not going there.
What about these aggregator sites? The report recommends having companies that don't comply with what's called discoverability, getting Canadian content. Will they be subject to a fine?
You'll have to invite me again once we have a bill, and then I'd be happy to go into details of how that regulation or legislation would apply to those companies in Canada. But I
guess we could tell you could tell us maybe what you're ruling out. For example, the panel, which is a broad in scope, says if international websites don't comply with our discoverability and these recommendations, they would be subject to some kind of fine or levy. So, the Daily Mail or Breitbart or something, would you take off the table that those companies would have to be subject to some levy if they don't comply with these new potential rules?
Again, when the report talks about discoverability, they're talking about making Canadian cultural content available and easily available.
But they're applying it to international websites. It's in the report.
Not to news agencies. I think that's where the distinction is. Must be.
I agree, but so I'm going to ask you again. You're the Heritage Minister. What falls under the category of news? Like I could ask you, CTV News may. Does Rebel News? Does other news agencies?
We're not in the business of deciding what. We're in a democracy. We believe in free press, and we will continue to do so.
I agree. You're saying that, but you are going to put a piece of legislation that will eventually define what's news, what's media.
No.
Well, you must, because otherwise
we're not touching the news side of the equation.
But you have to define it so you can figure out who's subjected to the rules and who's not, right? Isn't the implication you can't decide the boundaries of who gets fined and who has a requirement without a definition. So that's why it's so important.
We have a system in place in Canada right now, regulatory system for the creation of Canadian cultural content. And what we're saying is we want to redefine that to make sure that those that are benefiting from that system, the web giants, are contributing. That's what we're after. We're not after news agencies or organization, not at all.
So do you think, is your gut sense that the panel then overreached its redefinition of the Broadcast Act and the regulatory framework of the new, quote, CRTC? Have they gone beyond their scope in your view?
I think people it's a big report, 97 recommendations, very complex files, and I think some people are getting elements of the report confused.
I'm asking a serious question. Did you get elements confused when we spoke and you sort of suggested that media organizations are going to be licensed and registered?
We were having a conversation about some hypothetical situation, and maybe, I'm here to clarify that I'm not talking hypothetical here. What I'm saying is that there will be no licensing or registration required for news agencies.
Last question. Did you have a conversation with the Industry Minister, Minister Baines, and the Justice Minister, Minister Lametti, who said, hey, you've gone outside, these are shared jurisdictions, you're going to run into all sorts of pushback, go out, Minister Guilbeault, you better go out and walk that stuff back.
No, not at all.
No, they weren't concerned about that?
No. I mean, we spoke today, but this did not come up. Not at all.
All right, and just finally, when will we see you? You originally said in months you're going to put forward the bill. Given all the pushback, are you still keen on that timeline?
Oh, I don't think. Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We want to table this bill as fast as possible, and I would say within a matter of months.